What's human consciousness is an ancient question that ever since come along the history of thought in all cultures. Do you believe that the answer is closer today than in the past?
I'm not sure if the answer is closer today. Yes, it is true that it has remained an important mystery for a very long history of human thought. It's not just in the West, but also in the East. Human consciousness have remained a mystery for not just religious people, but also for philosophers and thinkers alike. The difference today is that now, for the first time in history, science is getting into the discussion. So we now have a new partner in the search for understanding consciousness, and this is a very new environment, very different situation. In the past, it was mainly philosophers and mystics and religious thinkers and maybe poets to some extent and literary writers. So from each of these perspectives, very interesting ideas and understanding about consciousness emerged, but there was no, because none of them could claim any greater privilege, over the other. The discussion was much more, one could say, a kind of a democratic. But now we have a new member in this study group, you want to call it, and this new member has a much bigger claim on reality, at least so far as the facts are concerned. And if consciousness is recognized as another fact, whatever science makes pronouncements on consciousness is going to have a major impact on how the rest of the other human community sees it. So in that sense, I think there is more at stake. But as to the resolution of the actual mystery of consciousness is concerned, I don't think we are near, yeah?
Okay. The researcher mind now implies very important questions like, am I my brain? Is there life beyond death? Or has living a meaning? What do you think about the role of scientists on answering these questions? And do we need also other disciplines to answer these questions?
Yes, inevitably these have been important part of the whole package of questions related to consciousness, because consciousness, the question of consciousness immediately connects with the continuity of the individual. And then the big question is, what happens after the physical death? Is there a continuity of the person, or is there continuity of some kind of consciousness? In the old days, people did not use the language of consciousness. People were using the language of soul, at least in the religious context. And most, big religions, great religions of the world, somehow have a general consensus that physical death is not really the end of the person. How the person continues after the physical death, of course, there are many different views. In the East, reincarnation has been a very important concept, both philosophical, ethical, and religious concept, not just for the Buddhists, but also for the Hindus. Whereas in the Judeo-Christian tradition, reincarnation was not the way in which the continuation of life after death was understood. It was more in a kind of a soul's journey towards God. So now that science has entered the debate, I think science will have to, whether the scientists themselves, because majority of them are kind of secular, materialist minded, whether as individuals, whether they like it or not, the fact that the questions of the continuity of consciousness has been an important part of the whole discussion historically. Scientists and science too will have to, engage with these questions. As to whether science can ever really address these questions, I don't know. In my own personal hunch is, I don't think so, because science we have to understand, regardless of how powerful it is one mode of knowing. And it's a mode of knowing that is modeled on a very specific conception of what knowledge is. And a knowledge in the scientific sense is an objective fact that is verified through intersubjective, process of verification, repeatability, and measurement, and so on. And questions about continuity of consciousness after death, I cannot quite see how that kind of question science will have a way of dealing. And also, even with the nature of consciousness itself, in the final analysis, the very property, the key property of consciousness, which is the experiential, subjective point of view, as science stands today, the way in which science is understood, the current paradigm of science, I cannot conceptually imagine, how can again science have a handle on this very uniquely subjective feature of our conscious experience. So I don't know.
From this argument of the subjective of the consciousness experience, in the Buddhism, the role of a crucial experience who break through all of the conceptual experience.
Sure.
It's very, very important. And I think that in the Zen Buddhism, even the role of the verification of the reality of this subjective experience is very important. I want to ask you two questions. The first is, in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are some ways to verify the reality, the truth of this subjective experience. And how do you think that in the intercultural communication, intercultural dialogue, it's possible to understand each other about this crucial experience?
I think similarly to the Zen tradition, the Tibetan tradition also emphasizes the role of experience as an important source of knowledge. So the problem is in the modern West, because of the dominant influence of science, when we say the knowledge of something, we immediately think in terms of discursive model of knowing that such and such is the case. So already conceptual kind of mode of knowing is built into the very conception of knowing. Whereas in the Buddhist tradition, when we say, for example, talk about the profound knowledge of the truth of emptiness, it's not really knowledge in the sense of I know that such and such is the case. Initially, yes, through reason, through concept, through deconstruction, you arrive at it. But the actual, final experience really takes the form of realization. So at that point, there is no real subject-object duality. There is no knower or the known. So, but this is an idea which is very difficult to communicate in Western terms, because the whole conception of knowledge is based upon this dualistic division of what is known and the knower. So I think that's the problem.
Going back to science, I would like to ask, as you say, science is dealing not really with the problem of the subjective experience because of his knowledge, his objective knowledge. But this type of problem is very common to many fields. I mean, we can try to find the objective experience only inside ourselves. And if we try to find it from the outside point of view, we have a flattening of the meanings.
Yes.
All the meanings are simply reduced to facts.
Sure.
And I think this is a very deep problem in Westerners' culture now. We call it nihilism or something else, but anyway, it's the lack of meaning.
Yes.
In Western countries, we have this problem anyway. We have a deeply eradicated and rarely expressed question for the meaning. In which measure you think that Buddhism, as a philosophy mainly, not as a religion, can help in facing this problem?
I think on the philosophical level, I think Buddhism may be able to serve as a possible example of how you can intellectually and philosophically embrace a worldview where there is a deep recognition of the essencelessness or groundlessness of our existence, but at the same time affirm the practical kind of meaningfulness of life. And Buddhism really stand as a possible example where historically, while intellectually and philosophically arriving at an appreciation and recognition of groundlessness to our being and existence, but at the same time, instead of sliding into nihilism and despair, has somehow turned it around and made that groundlessness as the very basis of openness and possibility. On that, the whole ethical concept of interrelationship of people, interrelationship of the interest and the well-being of each other, the relationship, the interconnectedness of sentient beings and the natural environment in one, where one lives. All of these are really based upon this in a very curious sense. All of these ethical kind of principles are grounded upon no ground. They are all grounded upon a groundlessness, and also it has inspired deeply spiritual and monastic tradition. But at the foundation, there is no absolute. At the foundation, there is no ground. And so I think what this suggests is at least a possibility that the West, as a culture and as a society, has, whatever historical reasons, has now arrived at a very critical point in its consciousness. As a culture, as a society, there is a deep recognition of this abyss, that there is no foundation. The carpet has been taken out, and we are still standing. And the question is, how can we somehow embrace this reality and not have to constantly worry that whether we are going to fall down? And I think Buddhism can serve as an example. But how this needs to be done is, of course, in practical terms, is a very difficult question.
Remaining on this ground, on this plane, about the interior experience, maybe can I ask you, what has been the most important experience in your life?
I would say that the most experience in my life had been my personal relationship with my teacher. I had the fortune to be able to actually live in the same house with him as a student for 11 years as a monk. And so it was for me a very important experience. It's to be able to live with someone who embodies a wonderful marriage of high philosophical thinking, deep spirituality, and wonderfully ethical and kind human being with a love of poetry. For me, that it's very difficult to explain and try to teach this. But when you live with someone who embodies this, its influence upon you cannot be underestimated. So for me, probably that's the most important experience.